This portion of CVI training for effective teaching of students with visual impairments is laying the CVI foundation, the CVI characteristics. I am Stephanie Steffer. After the completion of this session, participants should be able to identify the 10 visual and behavioral characteristics of CVI. The 10 visual and behavioral characteristics of CVI are color preference, need for movement, visual latency, visual field preference, difficulty with visual complexity, need for light, difficulty with distance viewing, atypical visual reflexes, difficulty with visual novelty, and finally, the absence of a visually guided reach. Christine Roman-Lantzy identifies the following 10 visual and behavioral characteristics. The first is color preference. Color for children with CVI is more important than it is to their peers. In some children, you can see a preferred color, and they may only view items in that color. This may stem from a color of their favorite stuffed animal, but it isn't always the case. Eventually, as the characteristic of color is refined, color may become important in images, or color may help anchor the child's visual attention to what's important. Next is the need for movement. The human brain is attracted and responds to things that move around you. A child with CVI is likely to show attention to things that have movement or movement-like properties. When we say movement properties, we are referring to items that trick the brain into looking like movement. For example, when light hits an item that is shiny or reflective, like mylar, the brain perceives this like movement. It is important to be aware of the reflective properties of an item. A silver item, for example, will reflect multiple colors within the room, and as we just discussed under the characteristic of color, some children can only process one color at a time. This may become problematic. Additionally, while for some children visual targets that are moving are helpful, movement can also be distracting. Can you think of a time when something moved or passed by you and distracted you from what you were doing? Maybe you were in a classroom and suddenly you find yourself turning to look and see who is walking down the hallway. That is likely because your brain sensed that motion and told you to look. The third characteristic is visual latency. This refers to the delay in response time. For children with CVI, we notice it often takes longer for the brain to process the visual presentation. You may need to present the visual target to the individual with CVI and wait. For some, this can be up to a few minutes before they show any looking behaviors. During this wait time, no additional prompts, physical or verbal, should be given. This can be difficult for us as educators, but every learner's length of wait time is unique. We must be willing to give them their necessary wait time. As we continue to learn more and more of the visual and behavior characteristics, you will see how they are intertwined and easily impact each other. For example, think for a moment of a student that becomes distracted by movement in the hallway. How might their latency impact their ability to refocus their attention on the intended target? Further, if a professional observes this behavior and doesn't understand CVI, how might they perceive this child's behavior? The fourth characteristic is visual field preference. Someone with CVI may have a preferred visual field. Typically, we see use of one, then both of the lateral fields, and as this characteristic refines itself, central vision begins to be utilized. The lower field is typically the last to resolve. Let's take a minute and understand how the brain processes information from those lateral visual fields in comparison to the central visual field. Dorsal stream vision is identified as where vision. Ventral stream vision is identified as what vision. Why does this matter, you ask? Let me show you. Let's try this activity that I learned from Chris Russell. If you have a piece of paper nearby, grab it. If not, grab something else that has writing written on it. Now, hold this piece of paper or other item up in your right or left peripheral field, your choice. Now, without turning your head, can you read and tell me what is written on that piece of paper? No. You can see where the paper is. This is you using your dorsal stream vision. Unless you turn and use both eyes together, you cannot read what is on that paper or identify what it is. This is because your what vision or your ventral stream vision requires use of central visual field. Now, place the paper in your central visual field. Now let's double check. Can you read the words on the page? Yes, because now you can access your ventral stream vision or your what vision. It is important for us to understand this. As we learn more about the vision of someone with cortical visual impairment, we must know that if they cannot access their ventral stream vision, they cannot and should not be expected to identify their visual targets. Moving along, the fifth visual and behavioral characteristic to look for is complexity. In her 2018 text, Christine breaks the characteristic into 4 subcategories. The first being complexity of the pattern on the surface of an object. A child with CVI generally demonstrates more consistent visual attention to targets of a single color. Early on, this may only be an item of their preferred color. Eventually, they will be able to have an item with the preferred and one non-preferred. Items with a lot of colors are often difficult for a child to process. Shown on the left is an Owlette character plush toy. She is primarily a red toy. For one of my students, this was a toy she loved. For this student, her preferred color was red. And with this toy, she could demonstrate joint attention. For some children, the additional colors on Owlette's face may add too much complexity. For comparison, the Jack-in-the-Box on the right has many colors, and the pattern would be too complex for my student, who could attend to the Owlette toy. On page 40 of her 2018 text, Dr. Roman indicates that as the child's functional vision improves, a child becomes able to attend and eventually discriminate targets with additional colors and increasing complex patterns. The second aspect of complexity is the complexity of the visual array. Your brain automatically sorts out sensory information that is deemed not relevant. You can be in a classroom and ignore certain inputs that aren't needed at that moment. Let me show you by testing your awareness. Take a look at this video.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Did you miss the moonwalking bear the first time? I definitely did. For those of you interested in the science, here is a diagram from Michael Halassa, a neuroscientist. Halassa's research indicated the visual thalamus can filter out information that we don't need. The first time we were watching for the passes, so our brain told us the moonwalking bear in a dark color was not relevant to our task. For an individual who has experienced trauma or damage to the brain, this networking in our brain may be disrupted. This disruption may cause typical environments to become overstimulating. In the educational setting, consider how the background on which you present materials impacts the learner with CVI. When you or another professional are holding up a new flashcard, for example, where do you hold it? But what is the background? In the image shown, the teacher is holding a tablet. In this case, the object complexity, the tablet, may be manageable, but look around the tablet. The child with CVI may not be able to sort out all that extra background information. I often observe educators presenting educational materials in front of their bodies. Could their clothing impact the learner with CVI? In a typical classroom, we usually see lots of resources being hung in the classroom, lots of colors. They are placed there by well-meaning educators who are trying to welcome and support all of their learners. Consider, though, how an environment like this can impact a learner with CVI. Consider the array of materials on a student's workspace. If you're anything like me, by now you're starting to wonder, what do I do about that? All IEP team members should be cognizant of the impact of the array can have on a child's ability to locate and eventually identify a visual target. I don't want you to get overwhelmed. In a later webinar, we will definitely discuss how to support children with CVI to ensure all varying levels of each characteristic are supported. But we can't skip steps. First, we need to know what to look for. Let's continue to work through the other characteristics. The next asset of complexity is the complexity of the visual elements of the human face. Eye-to-eye contact for children with CVI can be extremely challenging. Often, children will listen to the primary care provider's voice, but not look in their direction. Some children with CVI have been described as looking through people instead of making eye contact, or even having no regard at all towards someone's face. Even their own mirror image may be difficult. Once a child with CVI begins to look at faces, they may still have some difficulty discriminating faces, even those that are closest to them. The final asset of complexity is the sensory environment. This refers to a child's ability to tolerate additional sensory information while using their vision. For some children, they can only use their vision with no additional distractions. Additional sensory inputs are commonly thought of as the level of sound the child can tolerate, but this is not the only form of a distractor. For some children, certain smells or strong smells, or maybe even a physical prompt from a therapist, may be enough to break their ability to maintain joint attention on the target. Individuals with CVI may benefit from sequencing input. For example, giving directions verbally first, followed by waiting for the child to look, then a physical prompt, then followed by additional wait time for looking, instead of providing all of this information at one time. As we move away from complexity and continue along the remaining visual and behavioral characteristics of CVI, the next is now referred to as need for light. An individual with CVI may have an attraction to light. In some cases, children can be observed staring at primary sources of light. This may be overhead lighting or sunlight glaring in the window. Dr. Roman reminds us on page 46 that light-gazing behavior is associated with the dorsal stream visual functioning. She also clarifies that this light-gazing behavior was once referred to as non-purposeful gaze. We've moved away from this. As we learn more about these individuals, we now understand that it is more than staring off into a blank space, but rather a purposeful response to attend to an easier target. This behavior may be observed when the child is overstimulated by the complexity of the current visual targets. Additionally, as the need for light refines, we've learned that it remains to be an important factor for children with CVI. Targets can be paired with light in order to use this need to support and to increase visual attention. You may have seen individuals utilizing light boxes or tablets. This is due to the child's need for light. Next, we will begin to look at difficulty with distance viewing. Although the eye exam may tell us whether the child is nearsighted or farsighted, this is not what we were referring to when we mentioned distance viewing for children with cortical visual impairment. Difficulty with distance viewing is actually closely related back to the complexity of the array. When a target is further away, the complexity of the array increases. Take a look at this sample CViConnect activity. This is an example of distance viewing. In this image, the stop sign is relatively close with minimal additional information. As we move further away, the array around the target becomes more complex. When working with a child during an orientation mobility lesson, the instructor became aware that their student might not be able to properly identify a stop sign from a distance. After the lesson, the instructor showed the child a picture of a stop sign in isolation. The child was able to properly label the sign. The instructor then took these images from their route to work with the child prior to going back out into the community. When this same child with CVI was shown the bottom two images, he initially identified both as stop signs since they are both red signs. Bring the item closer. We can see they are not the same. With increased distance, we increase complexity. Like any other characteristic is that of the atypical visual reflexes. This is the only characteristic that is not part of intervention planning, although it should still be expected to improve as overall vision improves. There are two reflexes we assess: blink to touch at the bridge of the nose and blink to threat. These responses may either be absent or significantly delayed in an individual with a cortical visual impairment. Difficulty with visual novelty refers to how difficult new items or places can be for children with cortical visual impairment. Often, children have a favorite toy and have no interest when new items are given to them. An individual may need a large number of opportunities with a new target before it becomes familiar to them. This characteristic is related to the ventral stream visual pathway. The child needs to access their what vision to process the new target successfully. Imagine a classroom getting a box of new toys for recess, or a teacher adding new toys to some centers in the room. How might the child with cortical visual impairment respond differently than a child without CVI? Providing items that are visually similar to the individual's familiar items, or teaching the individual about the visual characteristics of the new target are just a couple ways we might support this difficulty with visual novelty. And finally, we've reached our 10th characteristic: absence of a visually guided reach. As stated in Dr. Roman's 2018 text, Jan and Groenfeld, as well as Milner and Goodale, and others, have found that many children with CVI have an inability to look and reach simultaneously. Further, Goodale describes this phenomenon as a lack of integrating between the dorsal and ventral streams of vision. This characteristic is when we see the stereotypical look away, and reach. One student would look at her switch and then look away before reaching to activate it. It is likely that she utilized her ventral stream vision to identify her switch. followed by turning away and using her dorsal stream vision to continuously locate her switch while reaching to activate it.
In a later video, we will discuss using these 10 characteristics to make materials accessible. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please contact your CVI mentor.